Confessions of a Fallen Student. Canterlot had fallen silent, the last flickers of daylight fading away as ponies of all sorts turned in for the night. Around Canterlot Castle, the gold-armored Celestial Guard turned over their patrols to the Night Guard, unicorns and bat ponies watching in silent vigil over the dimly lit streets. The civilian population of Canterlot was all but gone, save for a few stragglers coming to and from various parties and gatherings, oblivious to anything beyond their own plans and desires. In one of the alleys near the eastern wall of Canterlot Castle, there was a flash of teleportation as Sunset Shimmer stepped back into reality. She stood in silence for a moment before growling and smashing an armored hoof into the nearby wall in frustration. "That stupid nag," she hissed. "What does she think she can do? I'm not a toddler, I'm not going to sit quietly and let her trample all over me." Sunset paused, taking a few deep breaths to calm herself as she planned out her next course of action. "No, that can wait. First, I need to speak with Celestia. Once she sees the progress I've made, she has to start teaching me about chaos." Smirking, Sunset set down her saddlebags and started off, keeping to the shadows to avoid being seen. She paused only when she spotted members of the Night Guard on patrol, ducking out of their vision until she was certain they had missed her. No need to spoil my grand return with some pony else announcing my arrival. Another minute of walking, and Sunset found herself approaching the main gate. 2 pairs of unicorns and bat ponies guarded the entrance, their gazes fixed on the darkness for any that might approach. Sunset pressed herself up against the wall, peeking around to make sure the guards were not watching her. Yes, she could just go up to them and ask to be let in, but she was Celestia's personal student, why would she need to ask permission for anything? Satisfied that she would be able to make a clean break, Sunset prepared to step towards the gate. Before she could move, the doors began to swing wide, Sunset ducking back into the shadows as she watched the newcomers. First through the gate was a young unicorn filly, barely more than a foal. Her face was pressed into a book of some kind, yet she deftly stepped around the guards as if her vision was not obstructed. Following after her was another unicorn, a stallion with a dark blue mane and a heavy build. Probably one of Celestia's guards off duty, Sunset thought. Why he brought a little ankle biter to the palace is beyond me. So caught up in sizing up the 2 unicorns, Sunset almost missed a third pony that stepped through the gate, a pink alicorn with her hair tied back in a neat ponytail. Princess Cadence. What's she doing here? Don't run off, Twilight, Cadence called, trotting up to the filly and giving her a playful nudge in the side. If you can't see where you're going, you might leave us all behind. But I need to stay focused if I'm going to impress Princess Celestia, the little filly cried, drawing a derisive snort from Sunset. As if a little brat like you could impress the princess. She said she wanted me to do my best before she taught me anything more advanced, and if I don't study more I'll never get that far. You can't study forever though, Twily, the unicorn stallion said, stepping up and giving the filly a gentle nuzzle. Come on, Cadence and I planned out a nice get-together at Donut Joe's in celebration of your first year as Celestia's student. We've got a few surprises set up that even you will enjoy. Really? The filly asked, her face lighting up as she peeked out from behind her book. Like that first edition of Star Swirl the Bearded's biography Cadence told me about? Am I getting that? Can't tell you, silly filly, Cadence replied with another poke. That would spoil the surprise, wouldn't it? I bet it is, though, the filly cried, closing her book and bouncing up and down. This'll be the best studyversary ever. Sunset's eye twitched. Besides the sickening cuteness, there had been some information exchanged that had caught her attention. Cadence cares for her, and they say she's Celestia's student. Poor filly, they must be fooling her into being a model student. Her eyes drifted down to her sword and armor, a thought drifting through her mind. Well, as Celestia's favored, it would be rude of me to let her delusions go unaddressed. Sunset stepped from the shadows, crossing towards the trio before speaking. Excuse me, soldier, she said, just enough to catch Cadence and the stallion's attention. There was a pause before the stallion turned and whispered something to Cadence, the alicorn nodding before gently guiding the filly away. Sunset waited as the stallion turned towards her, watching as the filly protested against being pushed away. Is something wrong, miss? The unicorn asked, drawing Sunset's attention back to him. "Plenty," she started. "I find it unbecoming of a soldier of Celestia's guard to plant lies in the mind of an innocent young child." "Lies?" the stallion asked, one eyebrow raised. "I wasn't lying to my sister. What kind of freak would do something like that?" "You deceive her into thinking that she is something special," Sunset scoffed. "That she holds the ear of Princess Celestia herself. Ignoring that some pony like her could never rise to that station, you should know that Celestia already has a favored student." "Yeah, my sister," the stallion glared, pawing at the ground as he continued. "Who are you, and why would you say things like that about a little filly you've never even met?" Sunset was taken aback, almost recoiling at the shift in the stallion. You don't know who I am. Never seen you before in my life. From your red armor and robes I guess you're one of those mages from the Ever-Free Sentinels. You know, Twilight thinks a lot about you guys, but if this is how you act I don't see the appeal." Sunset sputtered, a nagging feeling growing in her mind as she tried to think of the best means to correct the stallion. "Celestia would never, she wouldn't." I can't believe how blind you are," she finally said, stamping her hooves as she continued. "I am Sunset Shimmer, heir to the stave of Arcanus, loyal servant and personal student of Princess Celestia. How you couldn't recognize me is a miracle I cannot even begin to comprehend. I've never heard of you before in my life, and that doesn't change the fact that my sister Twilight is Celestia's personal student, and has been for about a year now." Sunset could feel her teeth grinding together as the stallion continued. "So why don't you calm down and let us all lead our lives in peace? I'm sure Celestia still thinks highly of you, but there's no need to make this into a bigger deal than it is." How can you just dismiss me like that?" Sunset snorted. She could feel her magic wrapping around the hilt of her sword, but what restraint she still had left held her back from striking the fool. "I find it unbecoming to resort to violence, but if you will not accept reality and reason, I will be forced to beat some sense into you. That filly is not Celestia's student, regardless of whatever delusions you may be planting in her head, and I will not have you spreading such rumors to the wider populace." "Excuse me," Sunset flicked her gaze back, spotting a small troop of night guard approaching. "Great, now I have an audience." "Sergeant Armor, is this mare bothering you?" the leader asked. "She's been trying to convince me she's Celestia's student and my sister isn't." Sergeant Armor replied, stepping back to allow the newcomers some room. "I've got no idea what this mare's deal is. Do you think you can take it from here? I really need to catch up with Twilight and Cadence Dash." "You're not going anywhere." Sunset snapped, her horn flaring. Red tendrils sprang out of the ground and twisted around the stallion's legs, pinning him while the night guard drew their weapons. "Celestia would not replace me like this. She would never replace me. Take back your lies and I'll let you walk away from this." "Ma'am," the leader of the night guard said, leveling his spear at Sunset's head. "I'm going to ask you to release that stallion and drop your weapons. No one threatens a member of the Celestial Guard, regardless of what station they claim to hold. You stay out of this." Sunset quickly set up a barrier of magic between herself and the night guard, drawing her sword as she turned her attention back to the first stallion. "I guess you leave me no choice. If you take back your lies, I might be willing to show mercy." "I doubt it." The stallion lowered his head and fired off a simple missile. Sunset had no time to catch the blast, the spell knocked her back and broke her control over the tendrils and the shield. She snarled and lunged forward, but the night guard stepped between her and the stallion, one smacking her in the face with the butt of his spear. "Stand down, now," the leader said. "You can consider yourself under arrest for breaching the peace and assaulting members of Celestia's Guard Dash. I told you to stay out of this." Sunset cried, releasing a blast of magic that knocked back the night guard. The stallion had drawn back to a defensive position, but that was not on Sunset's mind. The fools had attacked her, caused a ruckus of what should have been her triumphant return to Canterlot. "I knew I should have just gone straight to Celestia. No matter, I can make up for lost time." Sunset galloped towards the main gate, keeping her sword down to reduce drag. The guards at the gate spotted her soon enough, wrapping the gate in a protective shield as they stepped up to block Sunset's charge. "Halt! Get out of my way! Sunset cried, reaching out and grabbing the guards in her magic. A quick push forced them into the wall, just enough force to stun rather than kill. The rest of her magic she saved for a strike against the gate, a bright bolt sailing forward and smashing through the hastily erected shield spell with little difficulty. She sprinted past the stunned night guard, her head whipping around as she searched for the quickest way forward. The main gate is probably well guarded, she thought. Celestia might get the wrong idea if I force an entry. Anti-teleportation spells will be weakest around the gardens, so if I head in that direction. A sharp pain stabbed into Sunset's hip, the unicorn letting out a hiss as she looked back. One of the damned bat ponies had shot her, a crossbow bolt sticking from a loose seam in her armor. She reached out and snapped the bolt off, ignoring her blood as it dripped down the side of her armor. She deflected the next shot with another shield, but the culprit ducked out of sight before Sunset could retaliate. "You dare strike Celestia's student," she bellowed, charging up more power as her enemies closed in around her. "Know when you face your betters and stay down." Another wave of force blossomed from Sunset's horn, knocking back all but two of the night guard. The closest one, a young stallion with a blue coat and white mane, ducked under Sunset's follow-up strike and swept out with his sword, locking Sunset's blade with his own. "Get away from me," Sunset cried, twisting her blade around and bringing the pommel down on the unicorn's head. He ducked away, his horn glowing as he brought his own sword up to deflect Sunset's next strike. "How many times do I have to knock you down?" "Doesn't matter," the unicorn replied, stepping back to avoid the next attack from Sunset. "You're the one attacking Celestia's palace, not me." "How dare you dash!" Sunset sputtered. "I would never stop mistaking my actions for treason. I am not a traitor." Sunset charged, bringing her sword down towards the unicorn's head. He sidestepped her strike, and before Sunset could follow up she felt something smack against her face. She cried as thousands of tiny particles stabbed into her eyes, her sword clattering to the ground as she pawed at her face. "Sand! He threw sand in my eyes." "What kind of pony throws?" Sunset's thoughts were interrupted by the stallion bucking her in the side, Sunset tumbling away and landing in a heap near the far wall. She blinked, trying her best to clear the sand from her eyes as the stallion approached. "Stand down," he said, bringing his sword into a guard position. "You're outnumbered and unarmed. Surrender before some pony gets hurt." Sunset snorted, rage building up inside her. He was just another obstacle, just like her mother. He wanted her to give up, to accept weakness and failure, be just like all the other cowards that populated Equestria. Chaos has no use for cowardice. Burn! With that, Sunset released her spell, a modification of her normal force spell that sent a wave of fire out at her opponents. There was a flash as the spell ripped through the courtyard, Sunset squinting as she pulled herself upright and poured more power into the spell. All of them would burn for delaying her like this. Even Celestia would understand a reasonable application of force. But soon her spell cut out, the flames snuffing even as Sunset poured more power into the fire. The surprised night guard found themselves wrapped in a gentle golden glow, carried away from the inferno by the newest arrival. "That is enough," Celestia's voice rang through the courtyard, the mare herself stepping into view. She carried her sword low, her eyes blazing with light as she fixed Sunset with a glare. "Whoever you are, know that attacking my guards is not without consequence. Surrender now, and I may yet show leniency to you." "Princess," Sunset said, bowing low before continuing. "I did not mean offense, but I had to defend myself." The light in Celestia's eyes died down, and she took a step back in surprise. "Sunset," she asked. "What are you doing here?" "I came back, Princess," Sunset said, smiling as she looked up at Celestia. "I'm sorry, but there were a few misunderstandings between me and your guards. They thought I was some madmare, trying to convince me you'd taken on some filly as a new student." "Sunset. But I'm back now. I've so much to show you. I've made great strides in my research, and I am ready to share all I've learned." Sunset. Sunset bit her lip at Celestia's cry, trying to get her excitement back under control. Excitement turned to worry as she looked at Celestia, the princess regarding her with sadness. "Why? Sunset. You aren't my personal student anymore. You haven't been for almost a year. No. And no, Sunset shook her head, her face falling. No, that's not true. Why you're joking, right? I was only dismissed for a short time, not cast out. Sunset, I am sorry that I did not make myself clearer. Celestia took a step closer. But I have nothing more to teach you. You needed to return to your home, regain the discipline and traditions of the ever-free sentinels to further your understanding. Your mother dash. That old nag only held me back. Sunset cried, a lump forming in her throat as she continued. But you know how best to teach me. You know the secrets I've been striving towards dash. Secrets that are mine alone to keep. Celestia said, her eyes narrowing. The power of chaos is beyond any mortal pony to comprehend, let alone control. The defenses I have taught you against its power are more than sufficient. That's what you might think, but I've done my research. There are paths, avenues that maybe you've forgotten. I've written them down in my spellbooks if you would just give me a few minutes dash. No, Sunset. You can't do this to me, Princess. Sunset cried, tears streaming down her face. I am your faithful student, your greatest student. I can control the powers of chaos, learn from it even. You can't just dash. Sunset choked as the realization hit her. The filly, escorted by Celestia's niece, while nobody else paid her any mind. It was far too much for a simple ruse. But you didn't you? You threw me out. Sunset, I never meant to dash. Yes you did. Sunset screamed, slamming her hooves into the dirt as she glared up at Celestia. You replaced me. Strung me along in my innocence and then threw me away like I was nothing. Everything you said, every word of encouragement you spoke to me during my training, all of it was a lie so you could raise up some little trollop without a care for what I could do. Sunset, Celestia took a step forward. I have always admired your skill, and your power. But your time as a student had passed, and it was time for me to seek out another deserving pony to teach. Twilight Sparkle is a marvelous young mare, and I feel the two of you would have much to learn from one another. No, Sunset snarled, drawing more magic towards herself. I am not trash that can be easily replaced. I am Sunset Shimmer, heir to the ever-free sentinels, and I am beyond any upstart filly you could think of to replace me. Sunset, Twilight did not replace you dash. Then teach me. Sunset stamped her hooves again. Teach me the powers of chaos. Teach me all the information you know, so I can truly become all I was meant to be. Don't hold anything back, I am more than ready. Celestia said nothing, watching Sunset with a pained look as the younger mare growled. Finally she spoke. Sunset, she said, closing her eyes. Chaos is too much for any pony besides me to safely handle. Defend against, yes, but handle? Only a pony with a completely calm mind, an earnest desire to shun evil, could even begin to glimpse what I have seen. A pause before Celestia's eyes opened, her gaze cold. And if this is how you react to such a minor setback, then I was completely right to withhold that knowledge, as I have since Mimic Sparkle herself held the position you now claim as yours alone. That's because they were all weak, just like you. With that, Sunset launched her attack, another beam of light racing towards Celestia. The princess barely even moved, a golden shield rising to intercept the blast and send it right back at Sunset. Sunset tried to raise a shield of her own, but the bolt struck with far more force than she anticipated. She was knocked off her hooves, slamming into the outer wall of the palace with enough force to break the stone. Sunset collapsed in a heap, taking several choppy breaths to regain her senses as Celestia stepped forward. Sunset, please, the princess said, her voice wavering. End this madness. Come back to your senses and become the bright young mare I once knew. You cannot control chaos, and you cannot defeat me. Please, she reached out a hoof towards Sunset. Let go of this path. Sunset looked at Celestia, then down at her hoof. It would be easy, just give up and accept failure. All those who came before her had likewise given up, why not her? Sunset glared up at Celestia. Never. I'll never give up, not until I have taken what is rightfully mine. Before Celestia could say another word, Sunset shifted her magic. Her teleportation spell would not be precise, but it would get her away from Canterlot and out of Celestia's immediate reach. She found herself lying in a forest, the surrounding trees looming over her in the dark. Now that she was alone, she could think. Celestia had betrayed her. Tossed her out for some usurper. Attacking the usurper to take back her place would be the best course of action, but Celestia would protect Twilight Sparkle. Sunset would need more power. Sunset needed chaos. Fine, she said, pulling herself off the ground. If Celestia won't teach me the power of chaos, fine. Who needs her? I'll find some pony who will teach me, and all of Equestria shall know that I'm Celestia's favored student, not some brat of a Sparkle. Sunset stepped lightly into the outpost, watching as the other devotees of chaos went about their work. Buildings were ransacked before being burned, with anything the disciples of Erebus did not need being left inside. If there had been a struggle, the disciples had left little trace, only a few bits of metal that could have been broken weapons marking the ground around Sunset. She paid that no mind. She had done her duty, and her master would be pleased. Erebus was standing in the center of the outpost, dark energy swirling around him as he gazed into the warp. The sorcerer appeared to ignore Sunset, continuing his incantations as warp energy and wind tugged against his robes. Sunset stopped a distance away and knelt, keeping her head low so as to avoid making eye contact with Erebus. Not that he deserves such respect, Sunset mused. I can do better than this, but I'll play nice for now. Celestia could appreciate that, at least. Master, she said, once she was certain he knew of her presence. The raid has been a complete success, as you predicted. Has it? Erebus asked, his smooth voice sending a chill down Sunset's back. Then why is it that you chose to defy my orders? Sunset's breath caught, and she lifted her head ever so slightly to get a better look at the sorcerer of chaos. I do not understand, she started. I did everything you dash. No, you did not. Sunset had no chance to speak before something tightened around her neck, yanking her from the ground. Now Erebus turned to face her, glowing eyes narrowing behind his horned helmet. I witnessed your performance, Sunset, and I find it most disappointing. Hiding among the rabble when you should be striding forward, allowing the warp to be unleashed among your enemies. Sunset choked, trying to come up with an answer that would not upset Lord Erebus further. I did not wish for them to be slowed further, she gasped. My cloaking spells were more than sufficient to allow our forces to attack with little warning. Did I ask for you to just use your cloaking spell? Erebus asked, dragging Sunset closer to him. A pity, when you first came to me I sensed such potential in you, but I find you, holding back. Are you really that weak? Sunset's struggles stopped, and she found herself returning Erebus' glare. I am not weak, she growled. I am not. There was a pause before Erebus' magic released, Sunset gasping again as she collapsed in the street. Fortunately, the sorcerer seemed content to give Sunset a moment to catch her breath. No, you are not weak, he mused, his horn glowing before a knobby staff appeared in his left hoof. But you are shackled. It is time we addressed that issue. Sunset pulled herself up as Erebus turned to leave, the young mare jogging to keep up with her master. All power demands sacrifice, Erebus said, his gaze forward as if a burning outpost were no more interesting than a picket fence. The disciples that did spot him and Sunset stepped back to allow him room, none of them saying anything lest they drew his wrath. When a predator kills its prey, the prey's life is sacrificed so that the predators might continue. Such is the nature of magic as well, to use it to its full potential, more than just base energy must be given to see it through. How can I achieve this, Master? Sunset asked. It sounded similar to the writings of the crystal tyrant Sombra, but Erebus was not one to settle for merely imitating those that had come before. And I will not either, if I am to prove myself to Equestria. What have I been teaching you in the years since you've entered my service? The weak remain to empower the strong. Erebus stopped walking, Sunset now seeing they were in an open field between the outpost's wall and the buildings. See here, I have given you a few subjects to practice on. Sunset raised an eyebrow at this before following Erebus' gaze. Gathered in the clearing, flanked by several lower-ranked disciples, was a collection of prisoners. Not prisoners, civilians. Most appeared to be earth ponies or Pegasi, useless to Erebus outside of extorting help from other chaos worshippers. The prisoners shied away as best they could as Erebus swept his gaze over them, Sunset watching her master for any indication of his next move. "Well?" Erebus asked, looking to Sunset. "What are you waiting for? These weaklings can do little against you." In truth, Sunset was stalling. Fighting in self-defense against misguided soldiers or her mother's lapdogs was one thing, but killing civilians. "I am not a traitor," Sunset thought. "Equestria has turned its back on me, but I am not a traitor. Apologies, Master, I was merely trying to size up the task before me, nothing more." "Hesitation is unbecoming a sorcerer of chaos," Erebus hissed, gliding behind Sunset. "Draw upon the magic of these prisoners, and you will be that much closer to unlocking your potential." Sunset hesitated again, looking to the prisoners as she thought of what to do next. She took a tentative step forward, her horn lighting up as she reached out with her magic. The prisoners could not see the spell she cast, still huddling in fear for what Sunset would do to them. Fear. That was all she could find. Any spark or gleaning of magic she could siphon off was buried beneath wave after wave of fear. Sunset quickly shifted her magic, deflecting the wave away as she tried to recenter her soul. "What are you doing?" Erebus asked, his voice now harsh. "They are afraid," Sunset explained. "I cannot reach their magic if their fear is blocking my power. Just give me more time to dash." Sunset did not have a chance to finish before Erebus' armored hoof collided with the back of her head, sending her sprawling. "Poor, naive girl," he mused, watching as Sunset struggled to get back to her hooves. "You allow yourself to be far too open to what your enemies feel. Do you think they feel the same about you? Do you intend to weep every time you strike down a loyalist on the battlefield?" And no. Sunset found her footing again, but failed to get up before Erebus stepped forward and pinned her with a hoof to the back. "You are weak, Sunset Shimmer," he continued, even as Sunset's hooves dug into the dirt. "A true sorcerer of chaos is unfettered by the suffering and pain around them. You must not feel for anything, only the power of the warp as it courses through you. I am not weak." "Yes, you are," Erebus released Sunset from the ground. "I do not have any time for weaklings. I am not weak," Sunset shouted, planting her hooves as she drew her power forward. "If you think I am some untrained foal playing pretend, I will remind you why Celestia chose me as her favored student. And yet you are here among traitors, unable to draw power from a single civilian." Erebus' eyes narrowed. "Do not try to deny it, Sunset Shimmer. You are weak." "I am not weak," Sunset bellowed, stomping her hooves before drawing in as much power as she could. Energy flowed through her, sparks dancing off the edges of her armor as she conjured up more and more power, her glare focused solely on the sorcerer before her. Erebus did not even flinch. If anything, he seemed amused. With a yell, Sunset released her magic, a bolt of light surging towards Erebus. The sorcerer did not even move, standing perfectly still as the spell crashed into him, passed clean through him as his body shifted to mist, Erebus reforming shortly after Sunset's spell dissipated. Sunset snorted, drawing back and readying a shield in preparation for Erebus' counterattack, but the old sorcerer still did not move. "Well done, Sunset," he said, causing Sunset to raise an eyebrow in confusion. "You might only do so subconsciously, but even then I will consider it a success." "Do what?" Sunset asked, allowing her magic to subside as she looked about in confusion. Inevitably her gaze fell upon the prisoners, 4 of the ponies lying cold and motionless. The others were struck by silent fear, watching Sunset as if expecting her to attack. Sunset reached out towards the fallen ponies, probing them to see what she had actually done. They were dead. Every last one of them. "In time, you will learn to master the technique, perhaps even be able to drain the life force of a unicorn." Erebus turned away. "But for now, I will let your previous infractions slide. Clean up this mess before we depart." "Yes, Master Erebus," Sunset said, her voice soft as she looked at what she had done. 4 ponies, 4 civilians, dead at her hooves. The power surge had been substantial, no doubt, But it was an accident, nothing more. She shook her head. I did not mean to kill them. Celestia will understand. Sunset started pacing, keeping her head down to avoid looking the other prisoners in the eye. Erebus had tricked her, forced her to reach out further than she intended in a misguided effort to force her to learn. No, Celestia did the same thing to me more times than I can remember. There are many sins I can turn against Erebus, but that is not one of them. And, well, it was not a worthless lesson. Sunset stopped pacing, bringing her head up to survey the burning outpost. But no, I can't turn my frustrations against civilians. They serve Celestia out of ignorance, not blind faith like soldiers. I can't just go about killing them whenever I need more power. But, perhaps there is a way I can do it safely, drain their power without killing them. That might just give me the edge over Erebus and Celestia. Sunset's worry began to abate, instead replaced by curiosity as she looked to the other prisoners. Don't worry, Sunset said, allowing a small smile to cross her face. I'll be sure to make this as painless as possible. The disciples of Erebus had been ambushed by the ever-free sentinels, the red-armored legionaries sweeping out of the forest to strike the sorcerers and cultists. Dozens already lay dead, most struck down by blade and bolt while others had been torn asunder by the might of magic that both sides brought to bear. At the center of the melee was Erebus himself, calling in defiance against the attackers as he conjured greater and greater spells to try and throw back the loyalists. Sunset Shimmer paid little mind to what her master was doing. All she cared for was the power. It flowed through her like a wave, every part of her body tingling as she drew upon the might of the warp. It crackled across her blue and gold armor, scorching the earth beneath her hooves and lashing out at anything that dared to draw close. It filled her vision, her eyes glowing with it as she smirked at the small squad of sentinels, forming up to try some semblance of defense against her. This was true power, the likes of which the peons of the ever-free sentinels would never understand. You think to haul me back to your pathetic princess in chains, she said, her smirk growing as she drew forth even more magic. My mother is a fool if she seeks to contain me. For that, you all shall suffer my wrath. With that she released her power, 5 blue bolts blossoming from her horn and rushing forth towards the defending legionnaires. Try as they might, they could not raise their own shields in time, Sunset's bolts blasting through them to leave nothing but ashes. She chuckled, stepping back as Chaos Legionnaires of Erebus Cabal moved forward to take their place, eager to reap a slaughter upon the sentinels. Well done, Sunset, a soft voice whispered from her side. She did not turn to meet her mentor, the old sorcerer drifting about as he continued. Your mastery over the warp continues to grow. Do not suffer those that try to hold you back, destroy them all, let them be the ones to suffer. Yes, yes. Sunset smirked, drawing forth her power once more as she stepped away from Erebus. I am Sunset Shimmer, the most powerful unicorn of this era. Celestia's parasites will cower before me. With that she threw herself towards another squad of legionnaires, blasting away with her magic once more. She had no need for a blade, the warp alone was her weapon, precise shots smashing apart armor and flesh as she advanced. She giggled, dancing about through the carnage as she continued her onslaught, heedless of whoever was caught in the blast zone. Ally, enemy, what did it matter? All that mattered was the power she wielded. She launched another spell towards one unsuspecting group, only to watch as it shattered against a turquoise shield. Growling in frustration, she turned to face the caster, drawing more power as she sized up the newcomer. Hello, mother, she spat. Sunset Shimmer, her mother looked like an older version of Sunset, dressed in red and gold robes and wielding a great stave marked with a bronze eye. Her face was set in resigned determination, as if Sunset's madness was but another fact of life. Do you not feel any pity? Why should I? Sunset asked, smirking again. These fools only tried to slow me down, to make me weak like them. It was only natural that I abandon them to their fate. They were your friends, Sunset, her mother cried, slamming the butt of her stave into the ground. They fought and trained alongside you all your life. And you would slaughter them all in cold blood. Don't try to guilt me into begging forgiveness, mother. Sunset stamped her hooves before continuing. I was right to break away from them, from you. These last 10 years I have explored power beyond all comprehension. I am stronger, more learned, better than you in every way. Even the gods tremble at my name." Her mother said nothing at first, merely giving a weary sigh as she brought her stave around. "Oh Sunset," she said. "I had hoped that perhaps, somewhere you still had some part of you that was not completely overtaken." Sunset scoffed. "Why in Equestria would she care about that? You couldn't even handle the truth that I was greater than you." Sunset drew up her magic once more. "Just accept that fact and die like all the others." With that she fired, a bright blue streak racing towards her mother's head. The elder unicorn blocked easily, the staff of Arcanus flashing as it reduced the spell to nothingness. Sunset growled and charged forward, casting another bolt downward to kill the great mage, but her mother vanished in a flash of light, appearing off to the side to strike Sunset with the stave. Sunset gave a grunt as the stave collided with her, her armor flexing to absorb the impact as she was knocked away. She found her footing soon enough, just as turquoise ropes lashed out from her mother's horn, looping around her legs and pinning her to the ground. "Ha! You think to restrain me with such basic spells?" Sunset cried, pouring more power forward until the restraints crumbled to nothingness. "You let your power control you, rather than controlling it yourself," her mother said, her voice even. "I have nothing to fear from you. Then you are just as stupid as I remember." Sunset fired another bolt, the very earth splintering as the spell streaked overhead. Her mother's shield took the brunt of the attack, but it was still enough to knock her off her hooves. With a roar Sunset charged again, horn blazing as she aimed for her mother's head. But once more the elder mare teleported away, Sunset finding only air as her mother reappeared 4 meters to her right. Sunset whipped back around, tossing a fallen sword towards her mother. Her mother deflected the projectile easily, but could not stop Sunset as she came barreling back in. She grabbed the sword and swung again, the blade clashing against the staff of Arcanus with little effect. Growling again Sunset struck, pouring more power into her strikes to try and overwhelm the elder mare, but her mother easily deflected the attacks before releasing a blast of magic into Sunset's chest. Sunset tumbled head over hooves into a heap of dead Chaos Legionnaires, shaking her head to clear her vision as her mother circled. "No," she thought. "No. I will not be defeated here." She got back to her hooves, drawing back her power once more as her mother approached. "You cannot defeat me, Sunset," the older mare said, lowering her stave before continuing. "Chaos has made your form unrefined, your mind weak." "My mind is not weak," Sunset growled. "I am the only one on this damn planet who truly understands what we face, what we can achieve. You were too blind, and Princess Celestia was too scared. I can control the powers of chaos, and they will bow before my might. Don't delude yourself, Sunset. No one can control chaos save Celestia herself, and if you deluded yourself so far in your treason I am not a traitor." Sunset roared, charging forward while releasing another magic missile at her mother. The great mage dodged, stepping back as Sunset lobbed spell after spell against her opponent. Her horn had started to ache from the strain, but Sunset's rage dulled her to all other stimuli. "Celestia betrayed me. You betrayed me. You always sought to hold me back, to turn me away from the truth. Well, no more. Once you die here I will truly be superior to you, and no one will ever doubt my skill again. Your skill is not in doubt. Your sanity, though, remains in question." Sunset ignored her mother's counter. Planting her hooves again, she focused her power once more, magic writhing around her as she took aim at her opponent. She could feel slight pain forming at the base of her horn, but that was nothing to slow her down. A true show of force would end this, and she would be the only one left standing. It was only after an audible crack echoed through her mind that she realized something was wrong. "Wait, wait," she cried, watching as the light around her horn grew to blinding levels. Slowly she lifted off the ground, dragged into the air by the mystical forces pouring in through her horn. Her mother drew back, a look of shock growing on her face. "Sunset, you are drawing too much power," she cried. "Release it before you lose control." I can do this." Sunset wiggled in an attempt to reach the ground again, but only succeeded in flailing helplessly. The power continued to build, pain shooting down Sunset's horn and her spine. Flashes of pain stabbed into her back, under her armor and through her body, causing her to twitch even as she flailed. She thrashed her head around, searching for something, anything, that could break the hold the warp had on her. It's too much. I can't control it. Sunset thrashed harder, the pain shooting down her back once more. Master Erebus! Help me! No, the sorcerer was nowhere near Sunset, but she could feel his voice boring into her mind. You have the strength and power to control this inconvenience. Master the warp and calm the storm. Take your place as a true sorceress of chaos, or are you so weak that you cannot fight back? No. I am not weak, she said, trying to bring more of her willpower to the forefront. It was just a little bit of magic slipping away from her, nothing she had not handled before. I am not weak, she channeled her will once more, focusing to try and bring the stream flowing through her under control. It wavered, the pain running down her back fading ever so slightly, and Sunset allowed herself a smirk as she wrangled the magic back under her control. The smirk vanished as soon as it appeared as a deafening crack echoed through her mind, Sunset watching in terror as fragments of her horn spiraled away into nothingness. Now, the warp surged in, Sunset going rigid as it tore through her body and soul. She screamed, her tears turning to steam against her cheeks as the warp lashed at her mind, her body useless against the onslaught. Sunset, Sunset let out a short gasp as a hoof rested on her shoulder. Let go, Sunset. Mother, she stammered, trying and failing to look at the older mare. I can't, the warp dash is overpowering you. If you try to fight it, it will only destroy your soul completely. Sunset could not respond, only gasp as she felt another line of magic flowing in to break the storm. Let go, Sunset. It was counterintuitive to most handling of magic. You never let go, you did not allow the warp to overtake you. That was just the quickest way to madness, death, and failure, but then, that was only in the case where there was not a veritable river of power flowing into one's skull. And with her horn broken, Sunset had no safe conduit to fight the flow, no way to stop from becoming a red smear across the ground. Instinct screamed at her to hold on. Against all else, Sunset let go. The pain flashed again, but now Sunset could feel a second force pressing into the tide. She still could not move, but out of the corner of her eye she could see her mother drawing close, her own horn and the staff of Arcanus glowing bright as she drew off the deluge of magic. Wind whipped around the two, spirals of magic drawn away to fade into nothingness. Spirits of the Empyrean, hear my voice, her mother chanted. I am the scion of Arcanus, great mage of the Red Order. Release now this child, for she is not yours to take. In the name of the princess of all pony kind, you will heed my words. Sunset winced again, the pain reaching a crescendo even as her mother poured in more power. In her holy name, you will obey. I am the great mage of the Red Order, and you will obey. Hollow words. If Sunset could not control the warp, what chance did her mother have? But soon, the pressure lessened. The pain subsided, Sunset falling still as the power of the warp faded away. She hung limply in the air, taking a few shallow breaths as she came back to reality, her mother's magic slowly fading away. Finally, as the last trickle of power flowed away, Sunset collapsed in a heap, the remnants of her armor clattering about her as she hit the ground. The pain may have subsided, but she could feel it lingering. Well, I suppose this was unavoidable, she could hear Lord Erebus saying. A shame that I have wasted so much time on something so fragile. Perhaps you, O great mage, may be more willing to listen to reason. This was answered by a blast of magic. Sunset could not see her mother stepping away to face her one-time mentor, but she could feel rage radiating off the elder mare. You twisted my daughter into a monster, her mother growled. For that, I will rip what remains of your soul from your body. Their fight would be vicious, but Sunset could not focus on that, all she could think of was escape. She tried to get back to her hooves, but only succeeded in flopping about, spitting out dirt that had collected around her lips when she fell. Her mother would kill Erebus, easily. When she was finished with him, she would return to kill Sunset. Her back legs useless, she tried to pull herself through the carnage, feebly pushing against fallen warriors to try and clear her path. Every movement, every breath, all it brought was more pain, fresh tears forming on Sunset's eyes as she moved. She whimpered, pain stabbing down from the useless stump that had once been her horn, small sparks flickering away as the last of her magic left her. She had made it perhaps a meter before she felt a hoof touch her side. With another gasp she looked up, coughing as she saw her mother leaning over her, worry lining her face. "Sunset." "Mother," Sunset said, her voice ragged. Please, spare me." "Sunset, I have no intention of killing you," the older mare said, pushing a few strands of Sunset's mane away before kneeling next to her. "I had only hoped to save you before you went too far." I am sorry, Mother." Sunset cried, tears flowing freely now. I only ever wanted you to be proud of me. I wanted you to see just how much I knew," and now, Sunset fell silent as the realization fell over her. 10 years she had embraced the darkness, the simmering madness that was chaos. 10 years of unbridled fury, lashing out at all that dared to stand in her path. 10 years of bloodshed, and for what? "Oh Celestia, I am a traitor," she whispered, almost oblivious as her mother swept some of her tears away. "I am a traitor." "Shh, Sunset," her mother whispered, taking Sunset up in a hug. "Do not think of that, not right now." Sunset gave a small gasp. Her breathing had become shallower, her body slowly numbing as she lay there. The pain was dying down again, but then... "I'm dying, aren't I?" she said. "The warp has ravaged your soul, Sunset," her mother said, eyes welling with tears. "That you survived this long is a miracle unto itself." I don't want to die," Sunset replied, trying and failing to shift about. I haven't. Chaos does not have a full claim to your soul." Sunset said nothing as her mother wiped away more tears. There may yet be some time, you will not be lost forever." Sunset tried to smile, but the notion was fleeting. She might not have been damned to be torn apart by demons, but her sins, those she could not ignore. Not in what time she had left. "Mama," she said, her strength finally failing her. I am scared, Mama. I'm scared." "Don't worry," her mother wept, pulling Sunset closer even as the younger unicorn drew her last breaths. "Everything will be alright, sweetie, everything will be alright. What is it that you desire, young soul? You want another chance, something that few among us have ever achieved? Why should you above all others be given this chance? You forget, I too sought redemption, and it was my actions that saved the Empress, and your kind as well. You think this one can match your achievements? Are you so arrogant to place one plea of redemption above all others? You do not see her for what she is, what she can do. Perhaps you might achieve it merely in jest. Jest, you amuse me. Both of you. The path of redemption is paved with blades, it will be interesting to see where you find yourself, and whether you are cut along the way." Sunset gasped, her head snapping up as she gulped down air. She blinked, her eyes doing her best to adjust to the darkness around her. What happened? She thought, trying to look around and make sense of where she was. She was in a cathedral, that much she could tell by the sweeping columns and broken frames that once held stained glass. The roof had caved in, stone and metal having smashed the pews beneath to splinters, and above Sunset could see a red sky filled with smoke. This isn't the Germain frontier," she stammered. "Where am I? And why is my voice so squeaky?" She tried to stand, but only succeeded in flopping over, and as she tried to right herself, Sunset found herself gasping at the sight of her body. Sunset's coat was gone, replaced instead by pink flesh. Her legs were longer and skinnier, ending in wide feet and almost comically small toes. Her forelegs ended in odd appendages tipped with spindly digits like a griffin's talons, though her nails were flat and rounded to almost uselessness. Whatever she was, she appeared to only be a child, and her magic was nothing more than a faint pulse at the back of her mind. Sunset tried to scream, but the words died in her mouth as she looked herself over, trying to make sense of what had happened. A commotion near the front of the cathedral drew her attention. A larger creature had stepped through, stopping once it had spotted her. It was dressed in light green armor and pants, a reflective cloak wrapped around its neck. Its arms were bare, revealing an intricate swirl of blue tattoos Sunset could only guess at the meaning. The weapon it carried resembled some of the cannons she had seen the Iron Hooves working on, though it was much smaller and more streamlined than anything they produced. The creature leaned out the entrance and called out in some weird language, a reply summoning a new group of its brethren that quickly moved into the cathedral. Sunset had to flee, but with her legs useless she could only flail helplessly through the rubble. She heard something call to her, and looking over her shoulder revealed a new creature among the group. This one was dressed in a blue and red uniform, a tall cap on its head and a sword in its hand. "It's going to kill me," she thought, scrambling back until she bumped against the ruined altar. Stay away," she cried, trying and failing to summon her magic. I don't want to die." The creature stopped, some of the sternness in its features falling away as it regarded her. It knelt, setting its sword down as it reached out a hand and spoke to her in a different language than the first one had. Sunset shied away, trying and failing to put as much space between her and the creature. The creature drew back for a moment, then reached out its hand again and spoke, soft words reaching Sunset even if she did not know what they meant. One word stood out, though. "Name. That's Germain, isn't it? It wants to know my name?" "Sunset," she stammered. "My name's Sunset." The creature paused, its face drawn with confusion. "Sarai?" it asked. "Name Nest. Sarai." Sunset opened her mouth to correct the creature, but she stopped herself. Maybe Sarai is Sunset in its language. Maybe it wants to help me?" Sunset looked at the creature, and as she chewed her lip she gave a small nod. The creature showed a hint of a smile before gesturing to itself. "Johannes Olivier." Sunset missed the rest of what the creature said, but once more she managed to pick out another word. "Come." This creature wanted her to come with it. Sunset hesitated again. Yes, the thing had not tried to kill her, but it could have been a trap. Find an innocent little, whatever she was, lure it in with promises of safety, and then gut her and leave her for dead. She needed to get back home, make things right, and she couldn't do that if she... There was a massive explosion, small bits of rubble raining down on Sunset and the others. She screamed, curling up into a tight ball as the others cried out to one another. Johannes ducked forward, scooping Sunset up in its arms before turning towards the door. Sunset squirmed, trying and failing to free herself as the creatures darted back out into the street. Right into hell. More of the creatures surrounded her, some taking cover behind shattered remains of buildings and great metal structures she assumed were vehicles. They were all dressed similarly to one another, with light armor and reflective cloaks, though some appeared more lightly built than others. Along the ground were bodies, dozens of them, some dressed like her rescuers while others wore very little. It was the latter that caught Sunset's attention, as instead of proper armor they wore dirty rags and scraps of metal, their bodies marked with tattoos and symbols that made her eyes ache. Marks of chaos. These things fight chaos. Sunset drew closer to Johannes, even as bright beams of light zipped overhead. Magic? No, it was too uniform, and when it struck some of the other creatures the lights seemed to wink out. The wounds left behind were much more gruesome, with those not killed instantly screaming in pain as flesh and blood were blasted away. They dashed behind a fallen statue, Johannes placing Sunset down as it shouted to its fellows and pulled out a boxier-looking weapon. Sunset had no time to react before it raised the weapon, thunderous bangs exploding across her hearing and forcing her to cover her ears. She barely noticed as Johannes ducked back down, crying out as a new flurry of shots struck the statue, showering Sunset with bits of rubble. Overhead was another roar, Sunset watching as a flying machine of some kind swooped down towards them. It was painted red, the only break being a white symbol resembling a drop of blood with wings. Leaning out of the front were golden figures not unlike the creatures around her, all of them carrying swords and axes wreathed in blue light. The newcomers leapt from their transport, gracefully descending into the fray with winged backpacks of some kind. Sunset did her best to turn away, hunker down more so she could avoid detection. She felt something tug against her shoulder before she was lifted off the ground. One of Johannes' fellows had picked her up, cradling her like any other child. Johannes barked something to the others, the creatures nodding before taking off at full sprint away from the fight, the one holding Sunset propping her head up to avoid jostling her too much. From here, she could see a wave of chaos worshippers charging towards the others, a particularly large specimen leaping over the statue to strike at Johannes with a rusty axe. Sunset could not look away. Johannes sidestepped the strike, bringing its sword down to neatly chop the chaos worshipper's legs off at the hip. The creature's torso flopped to the ground, giving Johannes enough time to step up behind it and shoot it point blank in the back of the head, the traitor's head vanishing in a plume of red. All the while Johannes' expression barely changed, as if battling against these zealots was as boring as brewing a cup of tea or rearranging a shelf. Even the bravest in Equestria would have had more of a reaction. As she was led further away, Sunset could do nothing else but marvel. Fits, you say? That is the best way to describe them. Frequent headaches, claims of hearing voices that are not there. And you did not think it wise to report this when they first started occurring. I have a regiment to command, apologies that I could not send one report concerning one child. It seems, Commissar Olivier, that you have a special attachment to this child. Sarai is like a daughter to me, yes. I had sent recommendations to the Schola Progenium to begin her training for the commissariat. That is to be put on hold. The description of her symptoms indicates to me that she is a psyker, possibly a telepath of some sort. As a representative of the Holy Ordos, it is my duty to secure all possible psychers for sanctification and induction into the proper channels. Lord Marcos, if you are thinking she will be well treated, Commissar. I will make special note that she is to be trained for some further use than fueling the Astronomicon, provided, of course, she transitions well into her powers and does not die from her training. I suppose I do not have much of a choice, do I? No, but understand this will be for the betterment of the Imperium. It was a bad dream. Sunset was sure of it. Her father had come into her tent, speaking to her about some man that needed to take her away. She had resisted, of course, crying out that she wanted to stay with the Tanith and with him. The man, Marcos, she remembered, had come in and offered her something, and after that. It's all a bad dream. I'll wake up and then father will be there. We'll have tea, just like all the other times. The first thing she could hear was screaming. Not the shouts of commands or a warning, just screaming. Hundreds of voices, all screaming over one another like hundreds of wounded and dying, inarticulate pleas of aid from Medici that would never come. Sunset furrowed her brow, trying to force the screaming from her head, but the rattling of chains broke her concentration as she opened her eyes. She was in a black room, only a few dim lights to keep her from total darkness. Ahead of her was a metal door set within a reinforced frame, marked with faint scratches as if something had tried to claw its way out. Sunset looked down, spotting the thick shackles that chained her arms and legs to the floor. The uniform her father's soldiers had made her was gone, replaced by a thin white slip marked with a black eye that did little to shield her from the cold. She tried to move, but the shackles held her fast, the rough edges cutting into her wrists and leaving deep red marks on her skin. This was real. This was a nightmare. Is someone there? She called, hoping that the screaming would die down. If anything, her words only made it louder. Please, is someone there? I don't want to be here anymore. Please, let me out. She pulled forward with her arms, hoping to find a weak spot in her chains, but she only succeeded in scraping her hands against the rough ground. Small cuts opened up on her fingers, drops of blood splashing to the ground as Sunset's worry grew. Please, let me go. I want to go home. The screaming began to die down, but now a new sensation replaced it. Numbness, as if Sunset had been plunged head first into a tank of ice water. The numbness bored into her, sinking into her muscles and bones as she fell still. While she could no longer hear the crying of hundreds of souls around her, Sunset's own soul began to sink as she felt nothing. Not even her own breathing or the chains around her limbs. She shivered. At least the screaming was close to something she knew. This left her no room for comfort. The door in front of her shuddered before sliding open, Sunset stumbling back as far as her restraints could allow her. In stepped two women dressed in gold armor, followed closely by a man dressed in white medici robes and another dressed in red and silver. In the darkness Sunset could barely make out who stood before her, but as the second man drew closer she recognized the face of Ibrahim Marcos, the man who had started this whole mess. "You're awake," Marcos said, his voice cold. Where am I?" Sunset stammered, hoping that speaking would be enough to ward off the numbness. If anything, it had only increased when the women in gold had entered. "Where's my father? I wanna go home." "That is no longer an option for you, child," Marcos replied. "You have been identified as a psyker, and thus you are now in official charge of the Holy Inquisition and the Emperor of Mankind. Please. I don't wanna be here anymore." Sunset tried again to loosen her chains, but the metal merely dug deeper into her skin. "Please let me go home. The only reason I am speaking with you now is that your father insisted you be given special care. I usually do not suffer sympathetic fools, but one can hardly argue with a commissar even in the best of times." Sunset fell still for a moment, allowing her arms to drop to her side as Marcos stepped towards her. "Do not think that gives you any freedom, lest it put mad ideas of escape into your mind. The Sisters of Silence are quite skilled at their tasks, and even if you are not slain where you stand I doubt you could command a whole black ship to lead you somewhere we will not find you." Sunset wanted to say something, but the words died in her mouth. She wanted to shiver beneath Inquisitor Marcos' gaze, but the crushing numbness prevented her from even speaking. Finally the Inquisitor turned to the others. "I leave her in your hands now. Be warned, she has shown hints of telepathy. Even with the sisters I do not wish to hear of anything unsightly leaking from this journey." "As you command, Lord Inquisitor," the Medici said, bowing as Marcos turned to leave. Some of her courage renewed, Sunset tried once more to free herself. Wait," she cried, thought Marcos made no indication he had even heard her. "Wait. I don't wanna stay here. Let me go back to my father. I won't have any more fits again, I promise." The door slammed shut, leaving Sunset alone with the Medici and the Sisters of Silence. The Medici nodded, the two sisters stepping to positions behind Sunset. The numbness grew with every step they took closer to her, such that Sunset began to feel her arms and legs falling limp. "Subject is female, Tanith stock mixed with Kadayan, aged 5 years, the Medici said, circling behind Sunset while paying no heed to her cries. "Initial reports indicate telepath. Full analyses will confirm if suspicions brought on by Lord Inquisitor are true. We'll begin testing now." Sunset tried to turn to see what the others were doing, but she could only see the Sisters of Silence looking passively ahead. Once more she tried to break free, only for the chains to hold her back as the Medici pressed some kind of helmet onto her head. Let me go," she screamed, thrashing about as the Medici continued his work. "I don't wanna be here. Let me go." Sunset's was cut off as pain flashed through her, every nerve and receptor in her body firing at once. She screamed, arching her back in one last attempt to break free, the chains digging into her wrists so deep they began to bleed. Still the pain persisted, her thrashing sending jolts of it stabbing down into her limbs. The crushing numbness slipped in between the jolts, but never long enough to break her mind free of the pain. Finally, Sunset was released. She toppled forward, panting heavily as the numbness returned. A river of tears flowed down her face, splashing to the ground and mixing with the droplets of blood left from her cut wrists. She tried to say something, but nothing came out except a few choked sobs. "Initial inferences are accurate," the Medici said, Sunset still sobbing even as the man drifted around to bind her wounds. "Subject shows heightened brain activity indicative of teleempathic functions. Marking as Beta plus level psyker will need further evaluations to determine if the subject should be reclassified as Alpha level. For now, I will ensure complete isolation so teleempathic powers do not cause unnecessary interference before sanctification." Sunset sniffled, trying and failing to block the memory from her mind. She heard footsteps, the Medici and the Sisters of Silence leaving her no doubt, but she barely made notice of that. Her gaze remained focused on the ground, her tears continuing to pool even as her sobs died down. Is this why I'm here?" she thought. I didn't mean to. No, I did mean to." I betrayed Celestia, killed countless ponies, tried to murder my mother. This is my punishment. This is what I deserve. No, this is what Sunset Shimmer deserves. I am not Sunset Shimmer. Sunset Shimmer died a traitor's death, and now she is suffering for that. Even as the screams began to draw back in, Sarai could find a moment's peace. Sarai looked over to where Twilight was seated, watching as the young woman made sense of what she had just said. When she felt she had been silent long enough, Sarai continued. There's not much more to say after that. I was brought into the Schola for training, primarily as an interrogator before I was released to the service of a certain Lord Inquisitor. Not that Twilight has heard of any real traitors like him. I took over his station following his death, and when the Empress asked me to come look for you I could not refuse. And now here we are. Sunset, Twilight started, looking up at the older woman. I had no idea. Don't call me Sunset, Sarai said, shaking her head as she turned away from Twilight. Sunset Shimmer died a traitor's death on Equestria. I am Sarai now, and with any luck I will atone for my sins and die an anonymous death somewhere in the Imperium. Twilight's jaw tightened, and Sarai chose to press onward rather than give the girl a chance to speak. The Empress entrusted me to find you and bring you to safety. Ultramar is the most secure region of space in the Imperium these days, so you will be protected until such a time as she returns. And what will you do? Twilight asked. My duty is to pursue and destroy the great enemy wherever it rises up against the Imperium. I intend to see that through once you are secured. So, what? You're just going to drop us off, send a message to the Empress as to where we are, and then just leave? If my options are that and risk facing Celestia again, I will go with the most practical choice. Sarai rose, turning away from Twilight. Now that you know everything, I suggest you return to your quarters and rest. Sunset, I'm not going to leave you out here by yourself stewing in your guilt. Twilight countered, standing and crossing to Sarai. You want to atone for what you did in Equestria, but you can't do that by just hiding away from everything and pretending like it didn't happen. I'm not ignoring my sins. Sarai snapped, turning to face Twilight. I am just choosing to approach them from a more meaningful angle. And what? Dying alone and probably having your soul eaten is more meaningful than just going to Celestia and asking for her forgiveness. Sarai scoffed at this and turned away. And here I thought you were Celestia's greatest student, she grumbled. What? Am I a toddler who knocked their milk onto the floor? I can't just go to the Supreme Master of Man and Ponykind and say I'm sorry I spent 10 years betraying everything you stand for and trying to murder my mother. Are we good now? If Celestia sees all you've done and how you're making amends, I'm sure she'll dash. You don't know Celestia like I do, Twilight, Sarai rounded on Twilight. The only punishment for tampering with the powers of chaos is death. Celestia may look the part of the kind and wise mentor, and perhaps she is, but she is still the Empress of mankind. If she allows a sinner like me, a traitor like me, to stand in her light once more, she shook her head. She wouldn't. After all I've done. You really think Celestia has no room for forgiveness? Twilight cried, her frustration building. Sunset. I told you not to call me that. Sunset, Celestia is not the Emperor everyone here thinks she is. The Emperor was a harsh man who you would have just cause to fear, but Celestia forgave Luna for all she did as Nightmare Moon. She has replaced cruelty with kindness, and you've seen for yourself how Equestria has changed from when it was first founded. Why do you think after all that she would not wish to make amends with you? Damn it, Sparkle, I did not spend 7 years searching for any sign of your survival to be lectured like a child. Sarai cried, her hands tightening as she glared at the younger woman. Twilight stepped back, but not from the outburst. Sarai had glimpsed enough into the other girl's mind to know she was not cowed by such things anymore. Shock and confusion bled from Twilight, the girl shaking her head slowly. What do you mean? She asked, her voice soft. We've only been gone a few months. I kept track. You, Sarai's gaze softened, her anger subsiding. You really don't know. Twilight shook her head, her worry rising. Sarai fought the urge to bite her tongue, perhaps say something to allay the girl's fear and send her on her way. No need to add another sin to my conscience. You might want to sit down for this, Twilight. 7 years, Mashes! Twilight cried, finishing her current lap of her room before turning back to the Inquisitor. We were lost in the warp for 7 years. It's not uncommon, Mashes offered, his voice weak. And with the kind of punishment we've taken, what with the warp storm and the attack on Solemnus, it's not surprising that dash. How is that supposed to make me feel better? I'm just as surprised as you are at this development, and I assume my panicking will not make it any easier for you. True. Twilight shook her head. But that's not important now. We're 7 years off schedule. What's been happening since then? I know I shouldn't have run off from Sunset like that. She probably knows what has happened since we left Rynn's world. Is that dark god still a threat? Are the Primarchs doing all right? Is Celestia? She stopped, her panic rising again. Why isn't she here? If it's been 7 years, surely she's aware we're missing, but it seems like she sent Sunset out here to find us when we first disappeared. Why hasn't she come looking for us? Why haven't I been able to reach her? Warp interference. Mashes offered. And is Sunset what you're calling Inquisitor Sarai now? She wouldn't just leave me alone unless she knew I wasn't in danger, Twilight continued, ignoring Mashes as she kept pacing. Maybe, oh no, what if something happened to her? What if we were all wrong and the Dark God could really manifest in reality, and what if he kidnapped Celestia, and what if dash? Twilight, worrying like that won't do anyone dash. I know that. It's just, Twilight's energy finally gave way, and she dropped down onto her bed and buried her face in her hands. I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore. I thought things were getting better when we found the element of laughter and Sunset rescued us, but now, Twilight dug her fingers into her scalp, trying to think of a way forward. Pacing was doing her no good, and talking with Mashes or the others seemed to only add to her fears. Princess! Why is this happening? Why now? Twilight flinched as she felt Mashes rest his hand on her shoulder. I know this has been a trying time for you, he said. But remember, we're here to support you through this. You're a talented psyker, Twilight, and I know you will regain contact with the Empress soon enough. Just don't lose yourself to despair again. Thank you, Mashes. Twilight whispered, lifting her head to look the Inquisitor in the eye. Can I have some privacy for now? I'm going to try and contact the Empress again, and then probably get some more rest. Take all the time you need. And with that, Mashes broke away from Twilight, stopping briefly by the door before continuing onward. Twilight sat up, wringing her hands as if waiting for Mashes to return and talk her down a better path, but when she was certain she was alone, she closed her eyes to focus. That proved to be a much more difficult task than she had anticipated. 5 times Twilight felt her soul calming, the whispers of the warp drifting through her mind, only for some flare or worry to rise up and drive her back to reality. She chewed her lip, doing her best to keep her frustration at a minimum as she tried focusing again. Frustration led to accidents. Twilight would not allow that. After another failed attempt at focus, Twilight heard a knock at her door. Looking up, she was surprised to see Sunset standing in the doorframe, the older woman massaging her arm in uncertainty. Sunset. I'm not, never mind, Sunset shook her head, stepping into the room and taking a seat across from Twilight. Well, you left in such a hurry after all I said. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Oh, Twilight looked away, her hands tightening around the hem of her skirt. Thank you. There was a lengthy pause, neither one of them saying anything for nearly a minute before Sunset spoke. Twilight, she started. I'm sorry that I yelled at you like I did. My past is not exactly something I enjoy talking about. For what it's worth, I didn't mean to pry too deep, Twilight replied, looking back to Sunset before continuing. I guess this whole mess kind of brought out the worst in both of us. I suppose so. Another pause, Sunset reaching up to brush a lock of hair from her eyes. You're trying to contact Celestia, aren't you? It's about all I can do right now, Twilight said, sighing as she sagged forward. But with everything going on, now that I know we're 7 years later than we should be, I just can't get myself to focus. Focus is a tricky thing like that, Sunset replied, giving a short nod. I suppose the only reason I got so good at telepathy was because I shut out everyone and everything around me. A pity I can't do that anymore. She reached up and tapped her headband. You, at least, can turn off your powers without outside assistance. I guess. Yet another pause. Try contacting her again. Twilight blinked and looked back to Sunset. Well, I'll try, but if I can't focus, what good will dash? Let me handle that, Sunset said. I can use my power to calm your senses. Then, you will be able to reach Celestia. But if your soul is linked with mine, even if only a little, Celestia will be able to sense your presence as well. That would only be if you are using my magic as a telepathic conduit, not a support. Sunset waved her off. Twilight, remember I wrote the book on this sort of thing. I can calm your mind and let you find Celestia, and she will be none the wiser. Twilight said nothing, her hands still tense as Sunset continued. Look, if nothing else it will set your mind at ease. That's more important than my own ideas of redemption right now. Okay. Twilight allowed some of the tension in her body to subside, relaxing even as Sunset reached out and took her hands in her own. What do you need me to do? Exactly what Celestia trained you to. Sunset replied. I'll take care of the rest. Twilight nodded, closing her eyes as she cast her soul back into the warp. This time, though, a calming feeling fell over her the deeper she delved, tension in her mind and body ebbing away almost to nothingness. She waited, spreading her soul out as far as she could in an effort to broaden her search, her hands tingling as Sunset's own power brushed up against hers. She opens her eyes to find herself standing alone. She stands on a violet disk, but the Eldar is nowhere to be found. Instead, she senses a shift in the immaterium, the flickering of a new presence at the furthest reaches of her consciousness. She turns, reaching out to try and focus on the source of the shift. Steadily the energy grows, a familiar warmth washing over Twilight as she reaches out. Princess, is that you? Twilight takes a step towards the source, her eyes brightening as it flickers and dances just out of reach. Each step she takes, however, does not bring her any closer to the source. It has to be her, she thinks. But, why can't I reach her? Princess. Can you hear me? She asks. The source flickers, but there is no further response. Twilight's shoulders sag, her head drooping as she makes sense of what has happened. Princess. I had thought you'd be here, that everything you said about the warp and time was true, she sighs. Maybe it is, and maybe the universe is just trying to break me again. A pause. The source flickers once more, but there is no further response as Twilight looks up. They need you, Princess, Twilight continues. They need you now more than ever. I don't really know what all is going on, but the Imperium needs their Empress. They need you. I need you. Another sigh as Twilight tries to think of what next to say. I know this message will reach you. You've never let me down before. And with that Twilight broke her connection to the warp, her eyes opening as Sunset drew her hands back. There was a pause before the older woman spoke. Well, she asked. Twilight started, massaging her arm again as she looked away from Sunset. I thought, just for a moment there, I thought I'd found her. Another pause before she looked back to Sunset. But if I did, she can't reach me either. Maybe whatever caused us to get flung 7 years ahead must have affected her as well. Maybe, Sunset shook her head. But just the fact that you may have found her is reassuring enough. We can try again tomorrow when you are more rested. You mean? Twilight asked, her eyes lighting up. You mean you are going to help us? For now, and I still intend to leave once you do make contact with Celestia. Sunset rose, straightening out a few wrinkles in her clothes before turning towards the door. But Celestia is the Empress, and far be it for me to go against my oaths to the Imperium and to her for whatever reason. It was not the answer Twilight was hoping for, but it was better than a straight no. She opened her mouth to speak again, but Sunset was already out the door before she had the chance. Twilight waited, as if expecting Sunset to return and talk with her further, but when that did not appear to be the case she sighed once more. 7 years, she whispered. Princess, wherever you are, I pray you return to us soon.